Digital ID Future is now by Victor Waenerlund. Victor, I hope you can see us. I hope you can hear us.
I do.
The
Hi, everyone.
stage is yours. Please kindly proceed with your presentation. And once again, thank you for your kind appreciation of our technical issue.
No worries, no worries. So, hi everyone. To give you a short introduction about myself, my name is Victor Waenerlund. I lead the global project management that covers security, maintaining every single customer contact and new innovation and approach to what lies ahead for the future for digital identity as well. So if you would like to proceed to next slide, please. So looking at today's modern society, when we're approaching it from a digital ID standard, right now 3.4 billion people are not active in the digital economy. And this means that we have around the world a lot of people that are unbanked. We have a lot of citizens that don't even obtain a normal citizenship in an ID form, a plastic card that all of you and myself that we're very familiar with, but also passports in that case. So if you go forward to next slide there. So generally when we look at the ID market and what lies ahead, we see that there is a need for an adoption and a drive to create a digital identity space, as well as has been through cross-border payments and similarities before. So next slide, please. So to establish the digital ID world needs to be surrounding around this is that we need to establish the trust from different authorities, different banks, private sectors and everything. And generally the fundamental things about the digital identity space is that it needs inclusion, it needs a sign, it needs governance as well. Because we can't only rely today on a digital modern society where we have an identity solution that is fully owned by either a user or a government. There needs to be a process that lies between that, and there's a lot of stakeholders as well that needs to be participating to drive this type of adoption forward as well. So next slide, please. So to give you a little bit of background about us, who we are at COVR Security, Peter Alexanderson is the gentleman without no hair on the right side. He is the founder of COVR Security. And originally he architected the Swedish bank ID system, which is world famous today for having the 98% adoption rate that it actually has. And this was way back in 2002, 2003. Which later was adopted by the 6 largest banks in Sweden, which created a company called Financial ID Technology. So this company was originated in the sense that they didn't want to bind a user to a SIM card or bind a user to a telephone number. So Peter came up with a clever architectural design of this on how to actually bind a user to their device. Similar as we bound users through OTP towards a hard token device as well before, but doing this in the more modern way, something that the user can actually be in control of, but generally eliminating everything that has to do with identity fraud as well. So COVR is the 3rd generation of this, where we put bank ID in a box. We developed security around this for about 3-4 years. So what I will discuss a little bit here is our approach to the digital ID standard as well. So next slide, please. So the Swedish model, it is based originally from having been connected through the 6 largest banks. However, that only drove the adoption up to 25% of the population. What was in need here was several different connection points to different services, different authorities and everything. So what happened here was that from the consortium that created this in the beginning, we had, as I mentioned, 25% adoption. But later on, when the tax authority said that, okay, if you were going into the website and doing your taxes, we'll pay your tax refund even earlier if you're identifying yourself with a digital ID. So that drove the adoption up to at least 40%, but it needed to take off there as well. So what was invented in Sweden was something between the 6 largest banks that was called Swish, which is a peer-to-peer payment solution. And this was created at least 10 years ago. So you can put in a cell phone number and transfer money from bank to bank instantly. And that drove the adoption at least up towards 60%. What later happened was also that you could look through your pension system and also your digital post box. So right now in Sweden, we don't have a lot of mail coming into our post box. Everything is digital. And we're looking at becoming actually the first cashless society in the world by 2023, thanks to this foundation as well. So 10.2 million people is the population currently in Sweden. The user adoption is 98%. This is connected to more than 3,000 services used in 2019 over 4 billion times. That's an average usage per user per year on 390 times. So that could narrow it down to sometimes 3 times a day, sometimes once a day. But typically myself, I maybe use it 1 or twice per day, generally. So next slide, please. So our aim is to put the customer in control completely when it comes to their data, and according to EU and everything, making sure that the customer is in full awareness of what is actually happening with their digital identity. Next slide. So our security logic behind this is based on 3 different pillars. We work with out-of-band technology, making sure that there's no man-in-the-middle attack. We have username and password free. So forget everything that has to do with an OTP or a username in any case. We use live biometrics, so we can also see that you're alive, but also asymmetric encryption. So our experience is based from the banking industry, but we're working within the healthcare space, within education, mobile carriers, you name it. Next slide. So different 2FA methods, that is quite common. The old way is the OTP SMS, where you have a shared secret on both ends. And this is not secure. And the cybersecurity experts, even today, they're questioning a lot of services. Why are you still using these outdated and unmodern ways of identifying people? And the problem here is that either if you're on the OTP or on the SMS side, any type of communication being sent here, you can actually intercept that and actually crack the communication. And if you have one of the shared secrets, you can also crack that, either from the server or the user. So there's so many ways of cracking this type of communication. So it's not really necessarily a good thing to have as well. Next slide. So our approach to this is a bit different. So what we do is that typically when we've onboarded a user towards a service, we bind the user to the device. We create something that we call a private key. We lock that to the device. It never leaves the device at all. So that is, you could say, a bearer of the identity of the user. What happens when the user initiates an authentication or authorization is that a communication channel is being set up between the user and the bank, creating a public key, which is fully encrypted, but also the channel is encrypted. That goes to the bank as a request. That goes later on through us in the same synergy, a new public key, a new channel, from us back to the user, from the user back to us, and us to the bank. And then there's a hook in the background letting someone in. So this means that every single communication channel that you see here, all the 5 different channels, they're fully encrypted, but every single communication sent between or inside of channels is also encrypted. So this means that you would have to use a Google quantum computer, IBM quantum computer, to actually crack this type of communication. And that would approximately take you 70 to 100 years to actually crack. So we want to say that we're 100% hacker proof. However, it's a very dangerous thing to say within the security industry. But I could possibly put my right hand to it that it would take you at least 50 to 100 years to crack that communication. Next slide, please. So the security is one thing, and that's probably what's underneath the surface of the iceberg and everything. But what is on the top end is the trust experience. We need to have a good user interface. We need to have something that is nice and easy to use for the user. So we're working with a lot of smart access areas, and we're making sure that we're actually helping the user to secure the identity, but also that we have a notification privacy, not showing anything before you logged in. And then, of course, the password-free enhancement area for the usability and convenience. But we're also making sure that this is regulatory ready and future-proof. So we can, in this case, make sure that you don't have to take in consideration everything that has to do with manufacturers and mobile operators as well. Next slide. So the ultimate goal here is that this is probably something that you're familiar with, that you've seen before, to give you some perspective. Showing the amount of clicks that actually it takes sometimes to connect towards a bank or a service. And you can ask yourself, 120 clicks, when they're not naming the name there, is that to, I don't know, file an application for a job, or what is it? I'm questioning that, because you have so much information you need to fill in. And what we want to do is that we want to put ourselves on top of Revolut there as well. So we can make sure that you can onboard towards any service worldwide within 3 clicks. So next slide, please. Perfect. So there, sorry, I forgot to turn that off. Embarrassing. So the standard for future generations is that we've proven the experience by the expertise and the help to help the banks and companies and everything, and governments, of course. But the benefit of digital ID is the adoption-driven area, where it can be used in so many different areas as well. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of different stakeholders. The private sector, for example, is an industry that will generate fast digital identification adoption to a wide range of digital services. However, within the banking space, it reduces the risk in fraud, both in online banking, phone banking, mobile banking, payments, credit card usage, and everything like that. But it's also cost saving to make sure that there's no fraud and that the fraud is actually eliminated. And from the government, central bank, and authority perspective, both, personal and e-government services are rolled out faster. Private sector initiatives with government support drive higher user adoption rates as well. And if we look at the people, finally, we make sure that they have safe access to online and mobile services. And it's generally the convenience of using one ID to be able to reuse that multiple online and different services, such as banks, universities, e-government, and many more as well. So next slide, please. So to bring you on and walk you through how easy the onboarding experience could be for both you and your customers, and also for yourself generally, I wanted to show you a little bit on how we do this. So if you swap over to next slide. So from the beginning, we did this quite easy. We make sure that either the user connects as the previous button saying create ID, or they scan a QR code on the website to onboard. So that's where we start binding the device anonymously. Then we ask them for a full KYC process. So we're taking the KYC process and they're going through the scanning of an identity, a live facial recognition software with biometrics. We're binding that in with a PIN code as a backup for the biometrics, of course. So if you jump forward to next slide. So what we're looking at here is, of course, everything that a good KYC solution does, and we're not the providers of the KYC. We're connected to the 5 biggest players in the market globally. So we have direct access into over 400 million IDs if needed. And what we do here is that we check every single option through these KYC providers, and we bind everything to your device. So then we're asking you, would you like to create a digital ID from this to be able to reuse for future purpose? Yes or no, to ask your consent. And then you can populate that with several different options of data. If it's your clothing size, or if you're, what's your wife's name? Almost was gonna say that, but what's your address and everything like that as well. So jumping ahead to next slide. So some of the key features, what we see directly connects you towards any different service is the login access part of things, where you can either access any type of service online or as well offline to become a member. So we're taking away everything that has to do with username and passwords once again. And it can be as simple as you scan or tap, do a facial recognition, or just use your PIN code to log in. Then we have the other area where it's transaction and live transaction, and that's more authorizing a transaction or a checkout. But what we also support is a two-way communication, and what's quite common there is the fraud within the senior citizen space as well. We've had a live case in Thailand where the closest branch office may be 4 hours away to someone, and there's a lot of fraud with sibling or a child picking up the service or picking up the deposit that should be taken to the account as well. So we're enabling that security, pushing out the notification, asking them if they want to do a deposit to their account, and from there we're asking them to do a liveness check. So next slide, please. We do also support multi-level authorization. So this is on the high corporate level as well, $1 million transactions, making sure that that is authorized by the CFO plus the CEO, and maybe the last person to authorize that transaction is the CEO as well. Next slide. So what we're looking at here is the security for all different customer touch points. We can onboard customers indirect through retail stores, e-commerce sites, or direct through applications and mobile channel. So there's so many different ways and different options that we can do this, which our platform supports as well. Next slide. I think this one maybe shouldn't be here right now. So just jump ahead to the next one after this. So looking at this from a banking perspective, we're able to deploy this across many banking divisions. And this is an example to show you some divisions within both retail banking and corporate banking, of course. However, as I mentioned there, it's adaptable to so many different services. So this is just to show you the linearity and how easy it is. And every single integration that is done here is isolated from one another. So you need the user to authorize a transaction. You can't authorize transactions through different channels within the bank in that case. So next slide, please. So to give you an insight of some of our partners, at least within different areas, we work with the Ministry of Finance in the UAE to health saving cards in Nigeria to eliminate child death through maternity as well. Pertusa, 35,000 engineers worldwide. We work with Visa. We've had projects with MasterCard SEC as well. So we're quite established within our space. Next slide, please. So the key value drivers, to leave you with that, of what is actually needed to adopt towards a digital ID in a digital society is the safeness and the security of things. Establishing the peace of mind for both the end users, but also for the banks, but also for the governments, and eliminating the fraud issue. But ultimately, what this drives is more customers. It drives more revenue. It drives even more transactions if you can have a linear, easier approach to how you actually present this to the market. And as mentioned, through private sector, government authorities, and banks as well. So next slide, please. So that's it for me. And if you have any questions, please feel free to also contact me through LinkedIn.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.